In the year 2247, Earth was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that follows a storm, but the deep, steady hush of a world that had finally stopped shouting. Wars, borders, rivalries, all had faded into history books that few read anymore. After the great collapse of the early 21st century, humanity had made a choice, not to reach for the stars, but to tend to their own garden. They called it the Silence Pact. No colonies on Mars, no ships beyond the Kuiper Belt, no messages sent into the dark. Just a single rule. Earth would not interfere, and in return, the galaxy would leave them alone. For 50 years, it worked. Alien ships passed through the solar system like tourists on a highway, never stopping, never even slowing. They zipped past Jupiter's storms and skimmed the rings of Saturn, treating the inner worlds like empty space. Most people didn't mind. They had clean air, stable governments, and enough to eat. Peace wasn't exciting, but it was safe, and safety, after everything, was enough. But not for Jake Holloway. Jake wasn't a soldier, a politician, or even a scientist with a famous name. He was a radar technician stationed at the Neptune Deep Range Array, a lonely cluster of sensors and solar panels orbiting the ice giant, so far from Earth that the sun looked like just another star. His job was simple: watch the void, log anomalies, and report anything unusual. In 12 years, he'd reported exactly nothing, until the morning of April 3rd. It began with a flicker, just a blip on his main screen, so brief he almost missed it. A signal, weak and broken, cutting through the cosmic noise. Not human, not any known alien frequency either. It pulsed 3 times, then stopped. Jake frowned, rewound the feed, and played it again. This time, he caught the words buried in the static. They lied. 3 words, spoken in a voice that sounded both ancient and terrified. Then, silence. He checked the logs. Nothing. The system showed no record of the transmission, as if it had never happened, but Jake had seen it, heard it, and that was enough. Over the next week, he watched the same sector of space like a hawk. He skipped meals, ignored maintenance alerts, and barely slept. His colleagues on the relay station thought he was losing it. Ghost signals, they called it. Neptune madness. But Jake didn't care. He knew something was out there. On April 10th, it came again. This time, clearer. The voice was female, strained but calm. If you're hearing this, do not trust the Concorde. Earth isn't neutral by choice. It's contained. Then static, then a sound like glass shattering across light years, and then gone. Jake's hands shook as he copied the file to a secure drive. He didn't upload it to the network, didn't report it. He just saved it, encrypted it, and hid it in a folder labeled Maintenance Logs Routine. Something in his gut told him not to share it. Not yet. What he didn't know was that someone else had heard it too. Back on Earth, in a small coastal town in Oregon, Lena Cruz sat at her kitchen table grading physics quizzes. She used to work at the Deep Space Observatory in Hawaii, decoding signals from pulsars and black holes. But after the Silence Pact, funding dried up, and she took a teaching job to stay close to her aging parents. She missed the stars, but she'd made peace with it, until that night. She'd kept an old receiver in her garage, just for fun, she told herself. It was connected to a dish she'd built from spare parts, pointed not at Neptune, but to the general direction of the outer system. She never expected to hear anything, but at 2:17 a.m., her speaker crackled. They lied. Lena froze. She replayed it 10 times. Then she checked the timestamp, matched Neptune's rotation, matched solar wind patterns. It was real. She tried to trace the signal's origin, but the data was too fragmented. All she could tell was that it came from somewhere near Helios Sector 9, the same corridor alien ships used when passing through the solar system. And that corridor had been unusually busy lately. 2 days later, news broke that a Cylon hegemony vessel had gone missing near Uranus. The Galactic Concorde blamed pirates. Lena wasn't so sure. Meanwhile, Jake received a priority message from Global Command, routine audit of deep range logs. He knew what that meant. They were coming for his data. He erased all traces from the main system, but kept his copy. Then he did something reckless. He sent an anonymous message through an old civilian channel, a narrow-band burst aimed at every amateur radio operator in North America. Just 3 words: listen to Neptune. He didn't expect anyone to answer, but Lena did. She decoded the frequency, matched it to his hidden signature, and replied with a single line: "Who are you?" Jake hesitated, then typed, "Someone who heard the truth." What followed was a quiet, encrypted conversation between 2 strangers who'd stumbled onto something far bigger than either of them. Lena shared what she'd heard. Jake sent him the full clip. Together, they noticed something odd. Every time the signal played, Earth's magnetic field showed a tiny, synchronized ripple, not enough to matter unless you were looking for it. Why would Earth react to an alien distress call? Lena asked. Maybe it's not alien, Jake replied.
That night, Lena dug through declassified archives from the early Silence Pact years. Buried in a footnote was a reference to planetary resonance studies, shut down after the Council declared all off-world research illegal. The lead scientist had disappeared. The files were sealed. The next morning, Jake's station went dark. Not a blackout, a hard wipe. All systems reset. His logs, his backups, even his personal messages, gone. Only his hidden drive remained, tucked inside a thermal sleeve behind a coolant panel. He knew then they were watching. But it was too late. The seed was planted. Back on Earth, Lena printed the signal waveform and pinned it to her wall. She started running simulations, feeding the pattern into old geophysical models. The results made no sense. The signal wasn't just passing through space, it was resonating with something inside the planet itself, like a key turning in a lock that hadn't been touched in centuries. Neither of them knew it yet, but they'd just uncovered the lie at the heart of the Silence Pact. Earth hadn't chosen neutrality, it had been forced into silence, and someone, something, was coming to make sure it stayed that way. Jake stared out the viewport on the swirling blue of Neptune. For the first time in years, he felt awake. The galaxy thought Earth was asleep, but someone had just kicked the bed, and the sleeper was starting to stir.
The Galactic Concord had 1,000 rules, but only one truly mattered. Never challenge a neutral world. Not because it was wrong, but because it was pointless. Neutral planets didn't build fleets, they didn't spy, they didn't matter. Earth had been listed as non-aligned and non-threatening since the first alien survey ship passed by in 2198. Its entry in the Galactic Registry was shorter than most asteroid descriptions, just a pale blue dot with a footnote. Species Homo sapiens, self-contained, no expansion, no contact. That changed the day envoy Cale Vros arrived. His ship, the Iron Vow, dropped out of fold space without warning, hanging over the Earth like a black pearl in the morning sky. No announcement, no request for clearance, just silence, until every screen on the planet flickered to life. From smartphones to stadium billboards, from kitchen tablets to subway signs, the same image appeared. A tall being with silver eyes and skin like polished obsidian, standing in a white chamber that seemed to stretch forever. His voice was calm, smooth, and heavy with authority. "People of Earth," he began, "you have violated the sacred trust of neutrality." Confusion rippled across the globe. Governments scrambled. News anchors stammered. Most citizens just stared, stunned that anyone out there even knew their world existed. Vros went on, "You are harboring a fugitive of the silent hegemony, a dangerous anomaly hidden beneath your surface. Surrender it within 72 hours or your orbital infrastructure will be disabled. Your satellites, your power relays, your communication network, all will fall silent. Compliance is not a request, it is your only chance." Then, just as suddenly, the broadcast ended. The screens went dark. The ship remained. Panic spread faster than any virus. Stock markets crashed. Airports shut down. Parents pulled children from schools. The Global Council convened an emergency session, but no one knew what the anomaly was. They checked every database, every sealed vault, every underground lab. Nothing matched. Meanwhile, in Oregon, Lena Cruz didn't panic. She got angry. She recognized the symbol on Vros's chest, a spiral with 7 points. She'd seen it before, embedded in the background noise of that Neptune signal. It was the same emblem used by a long-dead alien faction known only as the Watches of Stillness, mentioned in fragmented texts she'd studied during her observatory days. According to those texts, the Watches believed some planets were not just alive, but aware, and Earth was one of them. She called Jake through a secure line they'd set up using old ham radio encryptions. "He's not looking for a person," she said, voice low. "He's looking for the planet itself." Jake, still stranded at the Neptune array, now under strict surveillance, listened in silently. "Why would they think Earth is hiding something?" "Because it is," Lena replied. "Not on purpose, but the resonance we detected, it's not random. It's a response, like Earth is listening and maybe answering." They both knew what that meant. If the hegemony believed Earth was sentient, or worse, weaponized, they wouldn't ask twice. They'd destroy it. On day 2 of the ultimatum, the first sanction hit, not with bombs, but with silence. The hegemony's enforcement fleet, cloaked and swift, moved into position around the moon. One by one, they disabled Earth's satellites, not by shooting them down, but by emitting a pulse that scrambled their systems without physical damage. GPS failed, weather forecasts vanished, live feeds from space went black.
Cities dimmed as solar power relays lost connection. Hospitals switched to backup generators. The internet slowed to a crawl. People whispered that the end had come, not with fire, but with stillness. But in the chaos, something unexpected happened. From abandoned missile silos in Kansas, from underwater labs near Puerto Rico, from university basements in Minnesota, quiet voices began to connect without the internet. Engineers, hackers, former astronauts, and even curious teenagers with homemade antennas, they started sharing data through old shortwave bands and laser relays. They called it the Whisper Network. Lena became its accidental leader. Using her old teaching credentials, she reached out to former students, retired scientists, and even curious teenagers with homemade antennas. She didn't give orders, she asked questions. What frequencies still work? Can you boost a signal through Jupiter's magnetosphere? Do you have access to a deep ground sensor? One of those who answered was Danny Royce. Danny had served 2 tours on Mars before the Silence Pact shut down all off-world military operations. Now he ran a drone repair shop in Colorado, fixing delivery bots and crop sprayers. But he still kept old combat schematics in a locked drawer. When Lena asked if he could modify civilian drones to carry signal repeaters, he didn't hesitate. "I can do better. I can make them look like birds." By the end of day 2, hundreds of drones painted to mimic hawks, eagles, and gulls soared over major cities, bouncing encrypted messages between rooftop receivers. The hegemony's sensors ignored them. After all, Earth had no military, just birds. Meanwhile, Jake made a risky move. Knowing his array was being watched, he faked a coolant leak to trigger an automated quarantine. During the maintenance window, he rerouted power to a hidden transmitter, one built from spare parts and old NASA protocols. He aimed it not at Earth, but at a narrow band of space near Pluto, where a dead communications satellite still floated. It had no power, but its reflector dish was intact. He used it as a mirror. Bouncing his signal off the dish, he sent a coded message through the outer system, masked as cosmic background radiation. Only someone who knew exactly where to look and what to listen for would catch it. Lena did. The message was simple. They don't know it's alive, but it knows them. She stared at the words for a long time. Then she opened a new file and began typing a theory. Maybe Earth hadn't gone quiet because humanity chose peace. Maybe it had gone quiet because something or someone had tried to silence it long ago. And now, after centuries of slumber, the planet was starting to wake up. On the final morning of the ultimatum, Envoy Vros sent a follow-up message, shorter this time, colder. "You have failed to comply. Enforcement begins at dawn." As the first light touched New York, the hegemony activated the pacification field, a low-frequency wave designed to suppress planetary biosignatures. It wasn't meant to kill, just to numb, to make Earth forget it ever listened. But as the wave reached the atmosphere, something strange happened. It didn't pass through. It bounced. From Antarctica to Siberia, from the Mariana Trench to the Sahara, seismic sensors registered a single unified pulse, gentle but firm, pushing back against the field, not with force, but with presence, like a hand placing itself on a door and saying, "Not today." Vros's ship shuddered. Alarms blared in his chamber. His instruments showed impossible readings. Earth's magnetic field had shifted into a protective shell. Not artificial, not technological, organic, alive. For the first time in his long life, the envoy felt fear. Down below, Lena stood on her porch watching the sky. No explosions, no fire, just a quiet hum in the air, like the planet was breathing. Jake, millions of miles away, smiled at his screen. The signal had changed. It wasn't a cry for help anymore. It was a warning. And the galaxy was about to learn that Earth's neutrality had never been weakness. It had been patience.
When the hegemony's pacification field failed, silence fell. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy quiet before a storm. Envoy Vros didn't speak again. His ship hovered, unmoving, as if waiting for orders from deeper space. But on Earth, people didn't wait. They moved. Cities had gone dark, but minds stayed sharp. Without the internet, without satellites, humanity fell back on something older: trust.
Neighbors shared batteries, teachers taught radio basics in parks, farmers offered barns as signal hubs. What started as panic turned into purpose, and at the heart of it all were three people who had never met in person: Jake Holloway near Neptune, Lena Cruz in Oregon, and Danny Royce in Colorado, but whose quiet actions were stitching the world back together, one whisper at a time. Danny's drone fleet had grown. What began as a few dozen bird-like bots now numbered in the thousands. Painted in natural browns and whites, they flew in shifting patterns across North America, carrying microtransmitters that bounced messages between grounded receivers. He'd teamed up with a retired air traffic controller in Texas who used old radar maps to route the drones safely. They weren't weapons, they were messengers, and every message carried hope. Lena, meanwhile, had turned her high school physics lab into a command center. Whiteboards covered every wall, scribbled with equations, signal maps, and notes about Earth's strange resonance. Her students, now volunteers, monitored ground sensors linked to dormant volcano monitors in deep ocean buoys. They noticed something odd. Whenever a hegemony ship shifted position, the planet responded, not with violence, but with subtle changes in magnetic flow, like a cat turning its ear toward a sound. "Earth isn't fighting," Lena told her team one evening, her voice tired but steady. "It's listening, and maybe it's remembering." She didn't know how right she was. Far south in Antarctica, a small scientific outpost had lost contact during the satellite blackout, but two researchers, Maya and Ellis, had kept working. They'd been drilling near an ice ridge when their seismic tools picked up a rhythmic pulse, too regular to be natural. Digging deeper, they uncovered smooth stone walls buried 2 kilometers under the ice. Not metal, not concrete, something older. The walls hummed with the same frequency as the Neptune signal. They sent their findings through a geothermal-powered radio, one of the few still working. The message reached Lena in 3 days, carried by a chain of ham operators through Canada and down the Pacific coast. "It's not ruins," Lena whispered, staring at the sketches. "It's a chamber, built to resonate with the core." She realized then that Earth hadn't just been passive all these centuries, it had been waiting, and someone, long ago, had built listening posts to help it stay awake. Back in orbit, Jake watched the hegemony fleet grow restless. More ships arrived, sleek and silent, forming a ring around the moon. They weren't attacking, they were preparing, building something. He studied their energy signatures and saw a pattern. They were aligning with Earth's rotational axis. Whatever they planned, it would hit the whole planet at once. He needed to warn Lena, but his array was under watch, so he got clever. Using the gravitational pull of Triton, Neptune's largest moon, he timed a burst transmission during a scheduled maintenance window. He disguised it as thermal noise from a failing panel. The message was short. "They're setting an anchor. Aim North Magnetic Pole. Time 72 hours. Lena received it through a rebuilt shortwave station in Alaska, relayed by a fisherman who'd once worked on deep-sea cables. She knew what an anchor meant, a device to lock a planet's energy field, making it unable to respond. If the hegemony succeeded, Earth wouldn't just be silent, it would be blind. She called Danny. "We need to reach the north, not with weapons, with sound." Danny didn't ask why, he just started packing. Within hours, he'd gathered engineers, pilots, and former polar researchers. They modified cargo drones to carry low-frequency emitters, devices designed not to jam, but to harmonize. If Earth was a tuning fork, they would help it sing. But getting to the Arctic wasn't easy. The hegemony had blocked all major flight paths, so they went old school. Using decommissioned icebreaker routes and forgotten military supply tunnels, they moved north in stages. Snowmobiles, sled dogs, even repurposed mining rigs, anything that didn't rely on satellites. Meanwhile, Lena worked on the frequency. She combined the Neptune signal with data from the Antarctic chamber and Earth's own magnetic pulses. The result was a tone so simple it felt like a heartbeat. She called it the question, because that's what it was. Not a demand, not a threat, just an open call. "Are you there?" She tested it on a small scale, broadcasting from a hilltop array in Montana. Within minutes, the local birds changed their flight paths. Bees returned to hives that had been empty for weeks. Even the wind seemed to shift direction, as if leaning in to listen. It worked. Now they just had to aim it at the pole. On the second night of their journey north, Danny's crew camped near the Canadian border. The sky was clear. Above them, the aurora pulsed in slow waves, greener and brighter than anyone remembered. One of the engineers pointed up. "That's not just solar wind," he said. "It's responding." Lena, watching a live feed through a thermal camera mounted on a drone, saw it too. The planet was already starting to wake. By day 3, Danny's crew reached a hidden research station in northern Greenland, abandoned since the Silence Pact, but still powered by geothermal vents. They set up the emitters in a wide circle, aiming them not at the sky, but into the ground. The idea wasn't to shout into space, but to speak through the Earth itself. Jake, watching from afar, held his breath. As the final hour approached, Lena stood before a single microphone in her Oregon lab. She didn't speak words, she played the tone. And across the planet, people heard it, not with their ears, but in their bones. A deep, gentle hum that made dogs stop barking and babies stop crying. In hospitals, heart monitors synced to the same rhythm. In forests, trees swayed without wind. Deep beneath the ice, the Antarctic chamber glowed faintly. At the North Pole, the emitters flared to life, sending the tones spiraling down through rock and iron, straight to the core. The hegemony's anchor device fired at the exact same moment, but instead of locking Earth's field, the anchor was absorbed, rewritten by the planet's own pulse. The device didn't shut Earth down, it woke it up. Vross's ship shuddered violently. Consoles sparked. His crew reported that every machine on board was acting strangely, not broken, but respectful, as if the metal itself remembered who it served. On the ground, Lena looked out her window. The sky was calm, the air was still, but something had changed. The quiet resistance hadn't won a battle. It had reminded the world and the galaxy that Earth was not just a rock. It was a home, and homes protect their own.
The morning after the anchor failed, the sky over Earth didn't burn. No cities exploded, no armies marched, but everything had changed. The hegemony fleet still circled the moon, but their ships no longer hummed with power. They floated like driftwood, lights dim, engines silent. Inside the command decks, crews stared at screens that showed impossible things, machines bowing not to damage but to something older than code. Tools realigned on their own, weapons powered down without command. Even the air recyclers shifted their flow, as if making room for a guest who hadn't arrived yet. Envoy Vros stood alone in his chamber, watching data scroll past in languages his translators couldn't decode. His orders from high command had been clear: neutralize the anomaly. But the anomaly wasn't a weapon, it was a presence, and it had just spoken, not in words, but in resonance so deep it vibrated through every atom of his ship. He tried to send a distress call, his comms wouldn't obey, not because they were broken, but because they chose not to. That was the terrifying part. It wasn't force, it was choice. On Earth, people stepped outside, not in fear, but in wonder. The hum from the night before had faded, but the air felt different, cleaner, sharper, like after a storm that never came. Birds sang in rhythms no one had heard before. Rivers flowed with a strange clarity. Even streetlights flickered in time with something unseen. Lena Cruz stood barefoot on her porch, feeling the ground beneath her. It wasn't just solid, it felt aware. Not like a person, but like a vast, slow mind waking after a long sleep. She'd read ancient myths about the Earth as a living being, but she'd always thought them poetry. Now she wasn't so sure. She turned on her small field recorder and spoke softly. "If you're listening, thank you." She didn't know if it heard, but the wind shifted just slightly, as if in reply. Meanwhile, Danny Royce's team in Greenland packed up their gear. The emitters had fallen silent on their own, their job done. One technician ran a hand over the metal casing. "It's warm," he said, "like it's still breathing." Danny nodded. He didn't understand how any of it worked, but he knew one thing.
Earth hadn't needed weapons, it had needed a voice, and they'd given it one. Back at the Neptune array, Jake Holloway watched the hegemony ships power down one by one. Their shields dropped, their weapons went cold. It wasn't surrender, it was something deeper, recognition, like soldiers lowering their arms before a king they'd forgotten existed. He sent one last message, not to Lena, but straight into the void, aimed at any listening posts the galaxy might have. Just 3 words: Earth is awake. Then he shut off his transmitter and looked out the viewport. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. On the ground, scientists scrambled to understand what had happened. Seismographs recorded a new kind of wave, not from earthquakes, but from the planet itself, pulsing in calm, steady beats. Oceanographers found that deep currents had shifted, not chaotically, but with purpose, as if guiding something unseen. Even plant biologists reported that crops were growing faster, healthier, as if fed by more than just sun and soil. In Antarctica, Maya and Ellis returned to the buried chamber. The stone walls now glowed faintly, etched with symbols that hadn't been there before. The symbols matched no known language, but when they played the tone Lena had created, the walls responded, shifting slightly, revealing a passage deeper underground. They didn't go in, not yet. They knew some doors should only open when the whole world is ready. As days passed, life on Earth began to return to something like normal, but not the old normal. People talked more, listened more, argued less. There was a quiet understanding that they weren't just living on a planet, they were part of it. Governments tried to hold emergency meetings, but the Global Council had lost its power the moment the satellites fell. Now, authority came from those who could connect, not control. Lena found herself invited, not as a scientist, but as a bridge. She refused titles. She just kept sharing what she knew, one voice at a time. Then, something unexpected happened. The hegemony fleet began to move, not toward Earth, but away. Slowly, carefully, as if not to startle. Only one vessel remained, the Iron Vow, Envoy Vros's ship. One evening, a new broadcast appeared, not on every screen, but only on devices that had been part of the Whisper network. It was Vros, but changed. His silver eyes were softer. His voice no longer carried command, but question. We were told your world was empty, a silent rock, useful only as a waypoint. We were taught that sentience must be loud, armed, expansive, or it is nothing. He paused, looking down for a moment. We were wrong. He explained that the silent hegemony once tried to suppress Earth's resonance centuries ago, fearing its potential. They'd convinced the early Galactic Council that humanity was unstable, forcing the Silent Pact to isolate Earth, to keep it safe and quiet. But the truth was, they feared what might happen if Earth ever awoke and remembered its voice. Your planet is not a weapon, it is a guardian, and we were the intruders. Then he did something no envoy had ever done. He bowed. Not to a government, not to a fleet, but to the ground beneath him, unseen but felt. After that, the Iron Vow powered down completely. Its crew stepped onto shuttles and requested permission to land, not as conquerors, but as guests seeking forgiveness. The request went to Lena, Danny, and Jake, and hundreds of others across the world who had formed the Whisper Network. They didn't vote, they didn't debate, they simply agreed. Yes, but on our terms. The first alien to walk on Earth in over a century stepped on a quiet beach in Nova Scotia. He carried no weapon, only a small stone from his homeworld, offered in peace. As he knelt and placed it on the sand, the tide rolled in, and the water glowed faintly blue for just a moment, like a nod. Back in Oregon, Lena watched the footage on a repaired screen. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from awe. They hadn't won a war, they hadn't fired a shot, they had simply reminded the universe that silence isn't weakness, it's the space where understanding grows. Jake, looking at Earth from afar, whispered, "You were never neutral, you were waiting." And deep below the ice, in a chamber older than cities, the walls hummed again, softly, steadily, like a heartbeat returning home.
Months passed. The sky over Earth no longer held hostile ships. The hegemony fleet had withdrawn beyond the orbit of Uranus, leaving only a small diplomatic vessel in lunar orbit, one that asked permission before transmitting, before moving, before even opening a channel. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Earth was not to be commanded. It was to be respected. Life on the surface settled into a new rhythm. Not the old quiet, fear and isolation, but a calm born of understanding. People still farmed, taught, built, and dreamed, but now they did it with their eyes open to something larger. Children learned not just math and history, but how to listen to the wind, how to read the patterns in bird flight, how to feel the slow pulse of the ground beneath their feet. Schools taught that humanity was not the owner of Earth, but part of it, a single voice in a chorus that had been singing long before cities existed. Jake Holloway returned home. After 43 years in space, most of them alone at the edge of the solar system, he stepped onto soil that smelled of rain and pine. The Neptune array was now staffed by a small international team monitoring not just the void, but the quiet hum of the planet itself. Jake brought back a single possession, the thermal drive that had saved the first signal. He gave it to a museum in Vancouver, not as a relic of war, but as a reminder that truth often arrives in whispers. Lena Cruz didn't become a leader in the old sense. She refused titles, offices, or speeches on grand stages. Instead, she traveled from Alaska to Argentina, from Tunisia to Thailand, meeting with farmers, teachers, engineers, and elders. She didn't tell them what to do. She asked what they'd felt since the awakening, and everyone had a story. A well that ran clearer, a forest that grew back faster after fire, a dream shared by strangers on the same night. She collected these stories and shared them openly, creating a living archive called the Listening Project. Its only rule: speak from the heart and listen like your life depends on it. Danny Royce stayed in Colorado, but his drone shop became something new. He trained volunteers, not soldiers, but stewards, to use modified drones for healing, not hiding. They mapped wildfires before they spread, delivered medicine to remote villages, and even helped bees find new hives by tracking flower blooms through thermal imaging. His favorite project was the Sky Choir, a network of silent drones that flew at dawn, broadcasting gentle tones tuned to local ecosystems. Birds followed them. Flowers opened sooner. People said the mornings felt kinder. The Galactic Concord reconvened, not on some distant ring world, but in a virtual chamber built from human-designed protocols, open, transparent, and accessible to anyone with a basic receiver. For the first time, Earth had a seat, not because it asked, but because no one dared deny it. Lena represented humanity not as a diplomat, but as a witness. She didn't demand reparations or apologies. She simply said, "We choose peace, but not silence, and we will defend our home, not with weapons, but with unity." The Concord agreed to a new treaty, the Covenant of Respect. It declared Earth a protected world, not as property, but as a living entity with rights. No ship could enter the solar system without requesting passage, no signal could be sent without consent, and every new contact would begin not with scanners or shields, but with a question: "May we listen with you?" It changed everything. Alien vessels that once zipped past now slowed as they neared Jupiter. They sent simple greetings in open frequencies. Some even played tones of their own, songs from their homeworlds offered like flowers left at a gate. Humans replied not with force, but with music of their own. Whale calls mixed with piano notes, wind through redwood trees layered with children's laughter, the steady beat of a heartbeat recorded in a hospital in Calcutta. The galaxy began to learn that humanity's strength wasn't in its weapons or its tech, but in its connection to each other and to the world that raised them. In Antarctica, the buried chamber was finally opened. A team of scientists, elders from indigenous nations, and even a few quiet guests from the hegemony walked its halls. The walls showed images, not of war or conquest, but of balance, stars and roots, oceans and breath, silence and song. At the center stood a smooth stone pedestal.
When Lena placed her hand on it, the whole chamber lit up with light that had no source, warm and golden like sunrise. No one took anything. They only left a single offering, a seed from an ancient sequoia placed gently at the base of the pedestal. The walls hummed in response. Back in Oregon, Lena sat on her porch one evening, watching fireflies blink in sync with the stars. Her old receiver sat silent. She didn't need it anymore. The messages came through the rustle of leaves, the call of an owl, the quiet rise and fall of her own breath. Jake joined her a week later. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. They just sat, listening to the planet breathe. Danny visited too, bringing a small drone painted like a hummingbird. "It doesn't carry messages anymore," he said with a smile. "It just flies. For joy." And that was the real victory. Earth hadn't conquered the galaxy. It hadn't built empires or fleets. It had simply remembered who it was and showed the stars that the quietest worlds often hold the deepest strength. Years later, when new alien children learned of Earth in their schools, they didn't hear about weapons or war. They heard a story. Once a world chose silence, not from fear, but from patience. And when the galaxy crossed the line, that world didn't shout, it simply stood, and the universe stepped back in awe. Because some boundaries aren't drawn in fire, they're drawn in stillness. And stillness, when it speaks, shakes the stars.